my material was just the women's statements and some of the men's statements. So the ideas that I have written about in my book came from what the women talked about. I came with no agenda. I didn't want to prove the rising was good or the rising was bad, or there were lots of women or no women. I just wanted to see, what are they talking about? And one of the things they talked about was romantic love. And that interested me because Yeats is famous for saying in Easter 1916, hearts with one purpose alone. And he contrasts what he sees as the really ascetic hearts of the volunteers who were interested exclusively in revolution with the ornithological sex life of the moorhens and the moorcocks and so forth, so that the rebels had no sex. But in fact, two of the signatories left pregnant wives, Tom Clark with Kathleen Clark, and Joe Plunkett with Grace Plunkett. That's actually somewhat ambiguous, but her sister-in-law, Geraldine Plunkett, describes a miscarriage that Grace Plunkett had. So she was probably pregnant. One of the executed men, Michael Mallon, left a pregnant wife, Agnes Mallon. The O'Rahilly's wife, Nancy, was pregnant with a child. Robert Brennan, who was not executed but led the rising in Wexford, left a pregnant wife, Una Brennan, pregnant with the future New Yorker writer Maeve Brennan. So many of the volunteers were, they were mostly men under the age of 40, and they left a lot of pregnant wives behind them. But in the women's witness statements, you can find more about the romantic lives of the volunteers than anyone could have known at the time. For instance, take Con Colbert. He was widely known as a very pure man. He didn't swear, he didn't drink, he was very observant. His sister's witness statement, Lilla Colbert, talks about the woman that he probably would have married or that he loved, Lucy Smith, who in fact married Tom Byrne, who was also out in the rising. But she says after Colbert's death, Lucy Smith showed her love letters and notebooks full of poems and so forth that he had written. And he had said to her, he had brought his sister once to a ceilidh, and he said, I want to introduce you to the nicest girl in Dublin. However, if you read Annie Cooney, later Annie O'Brien's witness statement, you see that she had a graw for Con Colbert, and she didn't know about Lucy Smith. I don't mean to imply that he was two-timing, but just that he went to a lot of ceilidhs and he didn't always dance with the same women, clearly. And Annie Cooney talks about the fact that she modeled her Cumann jacket on Con Colbert's volunteer jacket. She was a seamstress, and she made hers look just like his. She was in the Marrowbone Lane Distillery outpost, and she talks about how when Con Colbert and his men arrived, everyone's spirits perked up. And when that outpost surrendered, she said she saw Con Colbert standing there, she said, stripped of his accoutrements. He didn't have his rifle anymore or anything, and he was just waiting to be led off. She went up to him and she wanted something from him, and what's interesting is that what she wanted is somewhere between a love token and a martyr's relic. She says that he had in one hand a piece of her mother's brown bread and in another hand a sock. And she says, I felt that he might need those, so I didn't take them, which shows great restraint and maturity. But clearly it's just like Min Ryan. Min Ryan was more or less the girlfriend of Sean McDermott, and he was in the GPO, and she wanted to be there. And she found Sean T. O'Kelly, her future brother-in-law, leading a bunch of men, and he said, would you like to get into the GPO? Would you like to see Sean McDermott? He knew what she really wanted. And she said, yes, we would, but we didn't know if we could. So he leads Min Ryan and her sister Phyllis into the GPO and just leaves them there. And she's looking around, and she said, I felt like the perfect camp follower, because she's really between identities there. She's looking for her boyfriend, but it's a military situation. She's a member of Cumann. She wants to do something useful. So I think a lot of the women were sort of trying to adjust their feelings so that they were really subordinating their romantic inclinations to whatever work they could do for the rising. Another experience they had that, again, you don't see, I haven't seen in any of the books, is the matter of treating wounds in sensitive places. And Catherine Byrne tells about treating wounds. She's not a trained nurse. She's a member of Kumaman who has had training in first aid. And the way she puts it in her witness statement, I think, speaks volumes. She says, they present her with a man who is bleeding and later dies, and she says, "In the presence of Father Flanagan, I dressed the wound which was in the groin area." And I think that in the presence of Father Flanagan is very important, because the celibacy of the priests mediates between Catherine Byrne and the naked man in a somewhat embarrassing place for her. There's another case in an outpost of the GPO where a man is brought in with a wound, and Christina Hayes says, "Where is the wound?" And they say, "It's in the thigh." And Anya Heron says, "Miss Hayes thought that I should treat the wound as I was a married woman." So there, it's not the celibacy of the priest, but the maternal, different kind of sexuality from the unmarried Miss Hayes that allows her to treat the wound. There's also not only a matter of women figuring out how to confront these potentially or possibly or vaguely sexual matters, but of protecting themselves. In several cases, after the surrender, priests stay with women, whether they're the only people left, for instance, in the Four Courts garrison, or when they're in Kilmainham and there are no men around, no volunteers around. Priests stay with them overnight to protect them. In the week of the rising, when women are captured but not yet put in prison, the British stash the women in Ship Street barracks. And there, and several times the soldiers try to kiss the women. And in one case, Kathleen Clark records this. A British soldier puts his arm around a Kumaman girl, Kathleen Clark calls her, and tries to kiss her, and she flips him over. And Kathleen Clark says, "That was a girl to be proud of." She's just really impressed and wishes that she knew that kind of self-defense. Then later, another soldier comes over to Kathleen Clark and comes very close to her, and she says, "He chucked me under the chin," and she says, "I didn't know self-defense, but I just glared at him." And that was presumably the glare of Kathleen Clark scared him away.